The mission briefing that destroyed my faith in everything I'd sworn to protect lasted exactly 14 minutes, and Captain Morrison delivered it like he was announcing a routine training exercise. "Gentlemen," he said, pointing to satellite. Photos spread across the briefing table. "We have American civilians being held at this compound, approximately 40 clicks north of Kandahar. 3 contractors captured during a convoy ambush 6 days ago." I studied the grainy black and white images. The compound looked typical for the region: concrete walls, flat roofs, a central courtyard. But something felt off about the intelligence. "Photos, sir?" I asked, raising my hand. "When were these images taken?" Morrison glanced at his notes. "Satellite pass from last Tuesday. Crystal clear confirmation of hostile activity." Sergeant Williams, our team leader, leaned forward. "What kind of hostile activity, sir?" "Armed figures moving in tactical formations. Evidence of guard rotations. Classic hostage situation setup." But as I looked closer at the photos, the armed figures looked more like shadows than people. The tactical formations could have been anything: civilians carrying water, children playing, women hanging laundry. "Rules of engagement?" Williams asked. "Eliminate all threats, secure the hostages, extract immediately. Command has authorized full combat clearance for this operation." My stomach twisted. Full combat clearance meant we could engage anyone we deemed a threat. In a hostage situation, that was a recipe for disaster. "Sir," I pressed, "what about civilian casualties?" "Intelligence reports from this area indicate significant non-combatant presence." Morrison's expression hardened. "Specialist. Torres. Those 3 Americans have been tortured for 6 days. Every minute we delay increases their risk." "Are you suggesting we prioritize hypothetical civilians over confirmed American lives?" "No, sir, but then gear up. Insertion at 0200 hours." The helicopter ride to the target took 43 minutes. 8 soldiers, loaded with enough firepower to level a city block, flying through the Afghan night toward what we believed was a terrorist stronghold holding American prisoners. I'd done dozens of these missions over 3 deployments. Hostage rescues were always dangerous, always complicated, but they were also why I joined Special Operations. Saving American lives, bringing people home to their families. It gave meaning to everything else we did in this war. But something felt wrong about this one. The intelligence was too clean, the photos too convenient, the timeline too rushed. In my experience, real hostage situations developed slowly, with negotiations and demands and international pressure. This felt like someone was in a hurry to justify military action. 2 minutes out, the pilot announced. Williams ran through final checks with the team. "Remember, these hostages have been captive for 6 days. They'll be traumatized, possibly injured. Move fast, but be gentle. Where the good guys act like it." The compound appeared below us exactly as shown in the satellite photos. Concrete walls, flat roofs, a central courtyard. But as we rappelled down, I noticed something the photos hadn't captured. Children's toys scattered around the courtyard. A swing set. Laundry hanging on lines. This looked more like a family residence than a terrorist hideout. "Alpha Team, take the North Building," Williams whispered into his radio. "Bravo Team, secure the courtyard. Charlie Team, sweep the southern structures." I was part of Bravo Team, responsible for the main building where intelligence suggested the hostages were being held. As we approached the entrance, I could hear voices inside, but they weren't speaking the harsh, urgent tones of guards. They sounded scared, confused, like people awakened in the middle of the night. "Breach in 3:2. The door exploded inward under our explosives. We flowed into the building with practiced precision, weapons raised, laser sights cutting through the darkness. And that's when everything went wrong. The first room contained what appeared to be a classroom. Children's drawings hung on the walls. A chalkboard displayed lessons in Dari script. Tiny desks arranged in neat rows. This wasn't a terrorist compound. It was a school. Clear left. Someone shouted, "Movement in the back room." Another voice called. We advanced toward the rear of the building, where our thermal imaging had detected multiple heat signatures. The intel had called them guards and hostages. As we approached the doorway, I could hear whispering soft, frightened voices speaking in local dialect. Williams kicked open the door, and we poured into the room with weapons ready. What we found weren't terrorists and hostages. They were families. Women and children, maybe 15 people total, huddled together in the corner of what looked like a makeshift shelter. They'd been using the school as a refuge, hiding from the fighting that had consumed their village for weeks. A woman in traditional dress stood protectively in front of the group, her arms spread wide to shield the children behind her. She was saying something in Dari, her voice shaking but determined. "Weapons!" Someone shouted. I spun toward the sound, my rifle trained on a figure near the back wall. Through my night vision, I could see arms moving, something being raised toward. Time slowed to a crawl. Training took over. Threat assessment. Target acquisition. Fire control. I squeezed the trigger. The figure crumpled to the ground, and immediately the room erupted in screaming. Not the angry shouts of combatants, but the heart-wrenching wails of people in grief. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Williams was shouting, but it was too late. I moved toward the fallen figure, my weapon still raised, expecting to find a weapon, an explosive device, something that would justify what I'd just done. Instead, I found a child, maybe 10 years old, clutching a doll to her chest. The weapon I'd seen being raised was a small toy, a cloth figure that her grandmother might have made by hand. The little girl looked up at me with wide, confused eyes, trying to understand why the big man with the scary face had hurt her. Blood was spreading across her shirt, dark stains that looked black through my night vision goggles. "Medic!" I screamed. "We need a medic now." But even as our team's medical specialist rushed forward, I knew it was too late. The child's breathing was becoming shallow, erratic. Her eyes were losing focus. She tried to say something, probably calling for her mother, but no sound came out. The doll slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor beside her. "What the hell happened?" Williams demanded. I thought she had a weapon. I saw movement, something being raised, ... Williams knelt beside the child, checking for vital signs that were no longer there. When he looked up at me, his face was a mask of horror and rage. "She's gone, Torres. You just took out a 10-year-old kid who was hiding in a school." The room around us was chaos. Women crying, children screaming, other team members trying to provide medical aid to people who weren't wounded, just terrified. The families had been using the school as shelter, sleeping in classrooms, trying to stay safe from the violence that had consumed their region. We just brought that violence directly to them. "Command, this is Bravo 6. Williams spoke into his radio, his voice hollow. "We have a major problem at the target site. Bravo 6, report status of hostage rescue. There are no hostages. Repeat, no hostages at this location. We have civilian casualties, multiple non-combatants, including children." The radio was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Bravo 6, confirm your grid coordinates." Williams read off our position. Another pause. "Bravo 6, you are at the correct target location." Satellite intelligence confirmed hostile activity at those coordinates. "Command, I'm looking at children's toys in school desks. This is not a terrorist compound. Bravo 6, stand by for updated intelligence assessment." We waited in that blood-stained classroom for 20 minutes, surrounded by traumatized families, while Command tried to figure out how their confirmed terrorist stronghold had turned out to be a refugee shelter. The updated assessment, when it finally came, was devastating in its simplicity. Bravo 6, be advised that satellite imagery was date-stamped incorrectly. Images were taken 14 days ago, prior to civilian evacuation of the area. Recent activity was non-combatant in nature. 14 days old. The intelligence photos that had justified our assault were 2 weeks out of date. Command had sent us to rescue hostages who didn't exist from terrorists who weren't there, based on satellite data that showed a completely different situation, and a child was gone because of that mistake. The extraction was silent. 8 soldiers flying back to base with the weight of an unnecessary tragedy crushing down on us. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. We all knew that what had happened in that school would follow us for the rest of our lives. The after-action briefing was a masterpiece of military bureaucracy. The incident was classified as a civilian casualty event during authorized combat operations. The intelligence failure was attributed to data processing errors and communication delays. The child's demise was listed as collateral damage during hostage rescue attempt. No one was held responsible. No one was disciplined. No one was even officially reprimanded. These things happen in war, Colonel Bradley explained during my debriefing. Fog of war, incomplete intelligence, split-second decisions under pressure. You acted according to your training and the information available. Sir, I ended the life of a 10-year-old girl. You engaged what appeared to be a hostile threat in a combat environment. The fact that the threat turned out to be non-combatant is tragic, but not criminal. She was holding a doll. You couldn't have known that in the moment. Night vision, stress, adrenaline, all factors that affect perception and decision-making. But I had known, deep down in that part of my brain that processes information faster than conscious thought, I'd known something was wrong. The movement had been too slow, too hesitant, too innocent. A real threat would have been faster, more aggressive, more purposeful. I'd fired anyway because I was scared, because my training had taken over, because it was easier to squeeze the trigger than to hesitate and risk being wrong. The nightmares started immediately. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that classroom, watching a child fall to the ground, seeing the confusion in her eyes as she tried to understand why the world had suddenly become so cruel. I finished my deployment in a haze of guilt and anger. The Army offered counseling, medication, support groups for soldiers dealing with moral injury. But how do you counsel someone out of the knowledge that they've taken an innocent life? How do you medicate away the image of a doll falling from dead fingers? I came home in 2012, hollow-eyed and broken, carrying secrets I couldn't share with anyone. My wife tried to understand, but how do you explain to someone who's never been in combat that sometimes the good guys are the bad guys? That sometimes American soldiers do terrible things with the best intentions? I tried to build a normal life, got a job with a security company, moved to a quiet suburb in Colorado, attempted to convince myself that what had happened in Afghanistan was just part of war, just one of those tragic accidents that occur when good people are put in impossible situations. But the guilt never left. Every time I saw a child playing with a doll, every time I heard a little girl laugh, I thought about the family I destroyed in a school that was supposed to be a place of safety. It wasn't until 2018 that I learned the whole truth. I was attending a veteran support group, trying to work through my PTSD with other soldiers who'd experienced similar trauma. During one session, a former intelligence analyst named Sarah Martinez shared her story about discovering errors in targeting data that had led to civilian casualties. The worst part, she said, was learning that some of the intelligence failures weren't accidents, that sometimes Higher command knew the data was bad, but authorized missions anyway. After the meeting, I approached her privately, told her about the school, about the outdated satellite photos, about the child with the doll. Sarah's face went white. "What date was your mission?" I told her. "Oh God," she whispered. "I remember that targeting package. I was the one who flagged the intelligence as outdated. I sent 3 separate memos to command, warning that the satellite data was 2 weeks old and likely inaccurate. What happened to your warnings? They were ignored. The mission was politically motivated. Someone needed to show results, to justify ongoing operations in that sector. They knew the intelligence was bad, but they sent you anyway." My hands started shaking. "You're saying they knew it wasn't a terrorist compound?" "They knew the satellite data was outdated. They knew there was a high probability of civilian presence. But the mission fit their operational objectives, so they authorized it anyway." The room spun around me. 6 years of guilt, 6 years of believing I'd made a terrible mistake under impossible circumstances. And now I was learning that the mistake had been deliberate. That command had known the intelligence was flawed and had sent us anyway. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I kept copies of everything, my warnings, the command responses, the authorization codes. It's all documented." She provided me with copies of her files. Memos clearly stating that the intelligence was likely inaccurate due to temporal displacement. Warnings about high probability of non-combatant presence. Recommendations for additional reconnaissance before authorization of lethal force. All ignored by commanders who needed a successful mission to report to their superiors. I contacted a military justice advocate, hoping to pursue charges against the officers who'd authorized the mission, despite knowing the intelligence was flawed. But I was told that the statute of limitations had expired, that most of the responsible parties had since retired, and that operational decisions made in good faith during wartime were generally immune from prosecution. No one would be held accountable for sending us to assault a school. No one would face consequences for ignoring intelligence warnings. No one would answer for the death of a 10-year-old girl who'd been trying to hide from the war. But at least I knew the truth. At least I understood that while I'd pulled the trigger, the real responsibility lay with commanders who'd prioritized political objectives over human lives. I still carry the guilt. I still see that little girl's face in my dreams. I still hear the sound of her doll hitting the floor. But now I also carry anger, not just at myself, but at a system that treats civilian lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of military objectives. The mission briefing that destroyed my faith in everything lasted 14 minutes. A moment. That changed everything lasted maybe 3 seconds. But the consequences of that night will follow me for the rest of my life. We were sent to rescue hostages. There were no hostages. There was only a school full of families, and a little girl with a doll, and a soldier who fired because he was scared and because someone in command had decided that knowing the truth was less important than claiming a victory. I squeezed the trigger because I thought I was saving American lives. Instead, I took the life of a child whose only crime was seeking shelter in a place where children should have been safe. And somewhere in a file cabinet in the Pentagon, there's a memo that proves someone knew this would happen and authorized it anyway.